I had known Daniel's father, Mr. Harris, for years, though I had never thought of him beyond the obvious. He was the man who drove us to football games in his massive SUV, the man who barbecued in the backyard while the rest of us laughed around the fire. He was, to everyone else, simply the dad. But to me, over time, he became something else entirely, a presence that filled more space than he seemed aware of. He was big in every sense of the word. His shoulders were broad, his stomach heavy, his steps deliberate, each one grounding him to the earth as if he could not be moved once he planted himself. Yet despite his size, he had an ease about him. He laughed loudly, often at his own jokes, and carried himself with a certain charm that made others comfortable. That mix, strength and softness, was what unsettled me most because I began to notice it when I shouldn't have. Daniel and I had been friends since high school, and by the time we reached our 20s, his home felt almost like my own. I spent countless evenings there, sharing meals, playing games, or simply talking late into the night. His father, however, often remained in the periphery, present but separate. Still, I caught myself watching him when I thought no one else noticed. I told myself it was harmless curiosity, the way one notices a painting on the wall more with time. But the truth was sharper. I was drawn to him in ways that made me restless. It was a Saturday evening when the invitation came. Daniel had left to meet some friends, and I was lingering in the living room, flipping through channels without really watching. Mr. Harris walked in, his step steady, his presence filling the quiet. He glanced at me with a small smile and asked if I wanted to join him for his nightly walk. It was so casual, so ordinary, that I almost refused out of instinct. But something in his tone, or maybe in myself, made me nod. The air outside was cool, touched by the fading warmth of the day. The streets stretched long and quiet, the lamps throwing soft halos on the pavement. At first, our conversation was nothing unusual. How work was going, whether Daniel had mentioned his plans for the next semester, idle talk about the weather. I answered politely, trying to keep my voice steady, though every moment spent beside him made me more aware of the strange rhythm of my heartbeat. As we walked further away from the familiar cluster of houses, the conversation began to shift. He asked about my family, whether I was happy living on my own, if I ever felt lonely. His questions were simple, but his tone carried weight, as though he wasn't just being polite, he was searching for something. I told him the truth, that yes, at times loneliness crept in, though I did my best to ignore it. He nodded as if he understood more than he was willing to admit. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it felt charged, like something hovering just beyond words. I found myself stealing glances at him, at the way the lamplight touched his face, softening the lines of age, at how his heavy frame moved with surprising steadiness. It was wrong, every thought of mine screamed it, yet it was impossible to push aside. At one point he slowed his steps and I did the same. He reached out briefly, his hand brushing my shoulder in a gesture that seemed casual, but the touch lingered a fraction too long. My breath caught before I could stop it. He withdrew, just as quickly, his expression unreadable, but my body had already registered the moment. We continued walking, yet the air between us had changed. I could no longer pretend this was just a friendly stroll. Something had shifted, subtle but undeniable, and my chest tightened with both anticipation and dread. When we finally paused at the corner where the street bent into shadows, he looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. His eyes held something unspoken, and I realized with a jolt that I wasn't imagining it. That was the first time it occurred to me this walk was not going to be just a walk. The street bent into quieter lanes, where the glow of lamps grew thinner and shadows stretched long. Mr. Harris walked a little ahead, his steps slower now, as though he was giving me the chance to catch up or perhaps to gather himself. I felt the silence pressing between us, not empty but alive, charged with the memory of his hand brushing my shoulder. When I drew level with him again, he asked softly, "Do you ever feel like the people around you don't really see you?" The question came out of nowhere, heavy with an honesty I hadn't expected. I hesitated before answering, but the weight of his tone demanded truth. truth. Sometimes, more often than I'd admit, you can be surrounded by people and still feel invisible. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the pavement. Exactly. You give years of yourself and still, somehow, you fade. You start to wonder if anyone remembers you're more than a role, more than a father, more than a provider. Just a man. The way he said it unsettled me. It was confession disguised as conversation, and I couldn't ignore it. My chest tightened, both in empathy and in fear of where this might lead. You don't seem invisible to me, I said before I could think better of it. The words hung between us, heavier than I'd intended. He turned his head slightly, his eyes catching the faint glow of a streetlight. And you notice things others don't. I can tell. His voice carried a low gravity that left no room for denial. I should have deflected, but instead I admitted, I do notice, probably more than I should. My pulse thudded in my ears, every word dragging me closer to a line I knew shouldn't be crossed. We kept walking, though neither of us seemed to care where the road led. The night air cooled, but my body felt too warm, my palms damp in my pockets. With every step, I replayed our words, layering meaning over meaning, as if trying to decode a language spoken only in glances and hesitations. Finally, he stopped near a bench tucked beneath a tree, where the shadows felt deeper and the world seemed to retreat. He lowered himself heavily onto the seat, sighing as though carrying more than just his weight. I sat beside him, cautious, but too entangled in the moment to walk away. For a while, we said nothing. The quiet stretched, filled only by the distant hum of cars and the rustle of leaves. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter, more fragile. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but it's been years since I felt wanted. Not just respected or needed, wanted. The vulnerability in his words struck me. It peeled away the image of the strong, jovial man I had always known and revealed something raw beneath. My throat tightened as I searched for a response. You deserve to feel that, I said. Everyone does. He turned to me fully then, his eyes searching, as if weighing whether I was speaking as a friend, as a son's companion, or as something else entirely. And you, he murmured, do you feel wanted? The question pierced deeper than I expected. My lips parted, but the truth tumbled out before caution could intervene. Not often. Not in the way I wish. His hand shifted, resting on the bench between us. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it inched closer until his fingers brushed against mine. This time, the touch was deliberate, not accidental. My breath hitched, but I didn't move away. The contact was slight, yet it burned like a confession neither of us could speak aloud. I felt the storm of guilt building inside me, Daniel's face flashing in my mind, the undeniable wrongness of this moment. But alongside it surged a hunger, sharp and unrelenting, to be seen as I was now, to be touched in a way that erased invisibility. We sat like that, fingers barely touching, yet bound by the electricity of it. I could feel the decision hanging in the air, a fragile thread stretched to breaking. Then he whispered, so softly I almost missed it, I shouldn't want this. My heart pounded, my voice unsteady as I answered, but you do. The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting as our shoulders leaned closer, drawn not by choice, but by something far stronger. And just as our faces hovered within a breath of one another, the world narrowed to that single point of gravity, suspense, inevitability, the edge of transgression. We didn't kiss. Not yet. But the line was there, beneath our feet, trembling, and I knew with absolute certainty that it was only a matter of time before we crossed it. The silence between us thickened until it was unbearable. His hand remained close to mine, neither of us daring to pull away, neither of us bold enough to claim what hovered there. I could hear his breathing, steady but heavier now, and feel the tension radiating from his body. Do you understand what this means? Mr. Harris asked finally, his voice low, strained, as though each word carried the weight of a secret he could not afford to speak aloud. Yes, I whispered, though my throat tightened around the word. And I did understand, maybe not the full scope, maybe not every consequence waiting on the other side, but enough to know this was wrong, forbidden, yet desperately human. He shifted slightly, turning toward me, his presence filling the narrow space we shared on the bench. For a moment, I thought he might retreat, might laugh it off, and call it a silly lapse in judgment. But then his hand closed over mine, firm and deliberate, sending a current through my body. That simple act broke something open. Our faces drew together, hesitant at first, then inevitable until our lips brushed in a kiss that was cautious, trembling, and yet charged with everything we had denied. It was not graceful. It was messy, unsteady, two people colliding in fear and longing. But it was real. The kiss deepened, each second unraveling more of the restraint we had clung to. His hand rose to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, while mine pressed against his chest, feeling the strength beneath layers of weight and age. The world around us blurred. There was no street, no houses, no night sky. Only the raw fact of him and me, together in this reckless moment. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, the air was thick with what we had done. I searched his face for regret, for panic, but instead I saw something quieter, relief. As though for the first time in years, he had been allowed to want openly. "I shouldn't have let that happen," he murmured, his voice uneven. "Neither should I answered. Yet neither of us moved away. There was no undoing it. The line had been crossed, and in its place stood a truth we could never erase. We sat in silence for a long time, the night around us unchanged, though everything within us had shifted. I thought about Daniel, about the betrayal curling its way into my chest, but I couldn't summon regret strong enough to erase the warmth still lingering on my lips. What I felt was complicated, heavy with guilt, yet threaded with a strange kind of freedom. He finally broke the silence. "I can't promise you anything. My life, it's already written. But tonight I needed this, needed to feel seen again." His words carried no excuses, only honesty. I nodded, understanding more than I wished I did. "And I needed it too," I said quietly, "even if it's only tonight." We rose from the bench together, his large frame moving with surprising gentleness as he waited for me to steady myself. The walk back was slower, quieter, every step heavy with unspoken thought. Our hands brushed once more, but this time we didn't let them linger. The world had returned, and with it, the weight of reality. When we reached the corner of his street, the glow of the house visible in the distance, he stopped. His eyes met mine with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "No one can ever know." "I know," I replied, and I meant it. We walked the rest of the way, without another word. When we reached the door, he stepped aside, letting me pass first, just as though nothing had happened. But as I crossed the threshold, I felt the enormity of what we carried. An invisible bond, a shared secret, an infidelity sealed in silence. That night did not end with declarations or promises. It ended with a single truth. For one fleeting evening, we had both chosen desire over duty, and nothing could erase it. And though I knew it was a mistake, it was also something I would never forget. The house was quiet when we stepped inside, the kind of silence that magnifies every creak of the floorboards and every breath taken. Mr. Harris moved ahead of me, his broad back casting a shadow across the dim hallway. I followed, my body still buzzing with the memory of his kiss, my mind already heavy with the knowledge of what it meant. In the kitchen, the faint glow from a nightlight illuminated the counters. He stopped there, resting his hands on the edge of the table, his shoulders rising and falling in measured breaths. I lingered near the doorway, unsure if I should speak or simply slip away. The air between us, once charged with unspoken desire, was now thick with something else. Guilt, uncertainty, the awareness of all that could collapse if either of us faltered. "You should get some rest," he said, finally not turning around. His voice was steady, but the weight beneath it was unmistakable. I should have obeyed, walked upstairs to the guest room as though nothing had happened. But instead I stayed rooted. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly. He turned then, his face half lit, eyes shadowed. For a long moment he studied me, as though trying to choose between truth and safety. "I regret the risk," he said at last, "but not the moment." The honesty in his answer unsettled me. It was dangerous, intoxicating, because it made me believe this wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice. My chest tightened with conflicting emotions. Relief that he admitted it, fear of what that admission meant, and a longing I couldn't shake. I stepped closer, the floor creaking beneath my weight. He didn't move away. If anything, he seemed to brace himself, as though daring me to close the distance again. "Then what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Now," he said, exhaling heavily, "we pretend nothing happened. For his sake. For mine. For yours." His gaze held mine firmly, demanding understanding, though his words trembled with the effort it took to say them. It should have ended there. The logical, safe, necessary thing was to draw a line and never cross it again. But neither of us moved. The silence stretched, pulling us tighter instead of apart. His hand twitched on the table, as though fighting the urge to reach for me. I knew then that what we had started wasn't going to vanish. A door had been opened, and no matter how hard we tried to shut it, the memory of what lay beyond would never fade. Finally, he stepped back, his voice rougher now. "Go upstairs. Sleep. Tomorrow, this will all feel different." But tomorrow was a lie. I could already tell. The secret we carried had become a living thing, pressing against us, demanding acknowledgement. I left him in the kitchen and climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. In the guest room, I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint echo of his words replaying in my mind, not the moment. My body still remembered his touch, the heat of his lips, the steadiness of his hand. My heart wrestled with the contradiction, knowing it was wrong, yet unwilling to let it go. I wondered if he was lying awake, too, down in the dark, thinking of me with the same restless urgency. I imagined his thoughts, torn between family and desire, respect and hunger, the man he was and the man he had revealed when he kissed me. The night stretched long, sleepless, haunted by what we had done. When dawn finally broke, pale light spilling through the curtains, it did not bring clarity. It only deepened the ache of knowing that the line we had crossed could never be uncrossed. That morning, when I saw him again in the kitchen, he smiled politely, as though nothing had happened. Daniel returned soon after, cheerful and oblivious, and the world pretended to be the same. But beneath the surface, the truth pulsed between us, silent and unspoken, binding us together in ways no one else could ever suspect. And as I sat there, sipping coffee and forcing a smile, I realized something with unsettling certainty. This story was not finished. Not by a long shot.